Good. Welcome back to Gabriel Moten. He is going to complete his podcast he's drawing from the tax records of Bexar County and finding amazing things. I've never had a student work this particular source, and so I'm very grateful to you, Gabriel. Welcome back to Mud, Blood, and Mother's Milk.
Thank you, Dr. Van Hoy. And again, thank you for everybody here. Thank you for ladies and gentlemen here at SACAM. Again, my name is Gabriel Ernest Moten, and I am I'm a, sorry, and I am a part of a Teresa Van Hoy's Topics in U.S. History class at St. Mary's. And before we actually get started, Dr. Van Hoy, I do have a question for you that I would like to have you answer in further greater context.
Yeah.
So the issue of slavery in Texas is quite a vast and complex issue. My question is, how far do you personally think, or do you personally know, um, the extent of how the issue of slavery here in the state of Texas, how far it reached?
How far it reached? Well, I would say that it reached at least nationwide and even internationally. So, of course, nationwide, if I'm interpreting correctly your question, nationwide, we find these enslavers linked to slave markets and colleagues, and even agents, their own agents, posted in New Orleans, posted in Richmond. And in South Carolina is another big hub for connections with our enslavers here in San Antonio. Now, internationally, the obvious connection is Mexico. There was a lot of negotiation with Mexico trying to persuade Mexico to extradite freedom seekers who had successfully run away or escaped to Mexico. But there were also less less diplomatic strategies, including illegal raids into Mexico to recover enslaved people who had gotten sanctuary. So certainly with Mexico, but also this whole question of slavery in Texas is animating a lot of discussion, even in London and in England, among abolitionist circles who are appalled that the U.S. has extended slavery into a former free a free area that Mexico had
Mhm.
ended slavery. And so um, when Texas first Texas and then the U.S. reinstates slavery in this area, it becomes kind of an international issue. So, did I understand correctly your question, or are you thinking about something else?
Oh, well, that was very good context, Dr. Van Hoyen. Thank you for that. But my initial question, and it could have been me, I could have worded it a bit awkward. So, upon statehood, when Texas became a state in the Union, and a slave state at that,
Mhm.
we are aware that most of the enslaved counties are concentrated mainly in East Texas.
Mhm.
But what I should have actually kind of asked and worded this, and I do apologize to you and the ladies and gentlemen here at SACAM, how far west do you
Or how
believe?
far west? Well, San Antonio at the time was pretty far west. It was pretty much the boundary of settlements, if you recall, in the 30s, certainly, but even up until the early 60s. The West Texas part was not settled by immigrants, Anglo colonists and immigrants and settlers until after the defeat of the Apache and Comanches and indigenous peoples. So really, we are as far west as you get in my. Um, I think we can say safely in this analysis. Also,
Okay.
if you think about West Texas, there you don't have the plantations and you don't have the domestic slavery. You don't need wet nurses and child tenders. There's just not the white communities. What you do have a little further west of us in this time period are German hill country towns, as you
Mhm.
know. And those German hill country towns were remarkable for their commitment to free labor. And in fact, that gets them in trouble, as you know, and even gets them, tragically gets them massacred in the Civil War.
Mhm.
Now, it is the case that an enslaver with strong ties to San Antonio, whose name was Nicholas Zink, did did set up a settlement in Bernie. So that's a little bit, tiny bit further west.
Okay. All right. Well, that answers my initial question for now, but we will get back to this topic towards the end of this podcast because
Okay.
I think you might be surprised by
Oh,
some.
this is the surprise you were promising me. I'm excited.
Yes, yes. All right. All right. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, and Dr. Vanpour, I'm going to share my screen and let's get this started. All
Okay.
right, so we're going to pull up the Bexar County tax records. And where we left off in the year, what was, I believe it was 1848. So let's go back to 1848. That'll be
I'm
image.
already interested in divine over here too. Let me just say.
Yes, yes. And zoom out.
Okay.
So 1848 again is where we finally get an organized template of these tax assessment records.
I'm going to
So
invite you to, yeah, make it slightly bigger
yeah,
because some of us are old.
okay, let's zoom out here. So this is the year 1848.
Okay.
And the reason why the first part of our podcast that was I had to highly stress that that these tax records were jumping around all over the place. So it was very hard to decipher as to how to assess them.
Yeah.
So from this year on out, we're going to see this kind of general template. You know,
Okay.
where you're going to have your
Oh
town
yeah.
line.
Now that it's a U.S. state, yeah,
Yes, now that
standardized. Yeah, yeah.
it's now standardized, and this column here is will be the enslaved and the enslaved persons. So
Right.
we already here we have Mrs. Anne Bradley for, and that's number 9. She is she
9.
she is accounted for. She accounted for 9 enslaved persons for the year 1848.
And how
Uh,
much is that figure? Is that 2,253 or can
that
we
look
Yep, yep, that looks like
that's
about 2,250 it looks like.
yes.
Okay, so she's a big player. That's a lot of money.
She
Oh,
is.
yeah.
All right. And as you, again, like see, we're going to see this general assessment from 1848 all the way till the end of the Civil War.
Okay.
And in terms of the 1848, let's go over here to the recapitulation. Or goodness, that's this word is a recapitulation
There
format.
we go.
There we go. So for the year 1848,
A little bigger, please, Eagle. I don't know if it's because I'm sick or what, but I'm having trouble reading. Yeah, so slide it over here so we can get that right part. Okay, recapitulation of resident list. Okay. All right. So, oh boy. Okay, this is great. So we have 1 million acres, almost 2 million. We have
752
62
town
town
lots,
lots. We have 162 enslaved peoples, 470
470.
horses, and almost 7,000 cattle. Okay. Sales of merchandise. Okay. So we got a lot of commerce, $43,000 in commerce, and we've got miscellaneous property for 15. So let's see, enslaved property is how much of that total? Is it looking like 54, 55? Let's say 55,000?
Almost 55,000, 54,950.
Wow. So that, Gabriel, your finding tells us that this is more than cattle and horses put together. And when everybody thinks about Texas, they think, okay, yeah, cattle and horses, that's what's important. But look at this. You're proving that totally wrong. You're also proving that it's more than business merchandise, more than more than commercial trade goods, which is a huge finding. And of the total of land, you're talking nearly 10%. You're talking over 10%. that enslaved people accounted for over 10% of land value at the time.
Mhm.
Oh, and that's considering that's almost 2 million acres. My gosh. This is a brilliant piece right here, and I've never seen it before. Very grateful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you go into the Bexar County Tax Assessment Records on Family Search, it is image 270.
Yeah. Thank you so much for helping us all get our bearings in this complicated set of sources. Nice.
Okay.
Okay,
And
I'm
so,
loving that. Keep going.
all right, you may leave. Let's move on to the year 1849. All right. So, and I still really think this is a really cool tool, everybody. It's just, it goes smoothly. You can
Yeah,
zoom in, zoom
yeah, yeah, yeah.
out. I also want to highly stress that I'm very appreciative that I can able to be doing this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I forgot to write the image down for 1849, but good thing I have this pulled up.
Oh,
So
good.
this right here is the general statement and
Recapitulation. Yeah.
recapitulation form. Again, I am sorry.
No problem. No
Uh,
problem. We'll team up. I'll do the pronunciation and you do the brilliant finds.
Perfect, perfect.
Okay. So wait a minute. Where's our category here
So
again?
our category is here, and if we follow this down
Oh yeah, we got
and we zoom in,
so we've got another 193. That's the total? That's the total,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah.
yes,
Okay. Okay. Wow. All right. So let me see if I recognize these names while I'm at it over here. So Woodward, who's the one with the 8?
that would be Mr. W.M.S. Wallace.
William Wallace. Okay. And then let's see if we have any females. Nope. Joseph
No, that Mr.
Walker. Looks like Joseph Walker. Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Right, and then we're going to go back to the tax assessment rolls. All right,
Okay.
for the year 1950, well, let's put this. What's also cool is that you could also put in the image
Oh, wait, I
numbers.
have a question. I'm sorry.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
you're saying that for the recapitulations of 48 and 49, it remained pretty constant.
Yes,
190? Yeah.
yes, that's what I
Okay.
did find.
Okay, that is interesting because I guess immediate post-war, uh maybe there wasn't a big boom in the enslaved market. So that's interesting. We'll see what happens in a couple of years.
And we will get to there in a couple years.
Okay.
So for the year 1850,
Okay.
again, this is a little bit of a blotchy little image, but that's okay. It's still legible.
Oh, good, good, good.
This
Okay,
is
recapitulation for 1850 on image 395. And here we have a total of, oh yeah, so now it's creeping up. Now we've got 248 and it's coming out a solid nearly 100,000. We're about to break into the 6 digits here. Uh-oh, wait. I'm spotting something interesting now. I'm spotting, is that 90,000? Yeah.
yes, 90,950.
150. Okay, so you know what you're revealing to us here too, Gabriel, is that suddenly the percentage of total property is is jumping. So even though uh so you see that it's almost now oh dang, it's getting into 1/5. It's getting into 20%, not 10%, but 20% of land. In your original one in 49, enslaved people were 10% of land value. Now we're talking pretty close to 20%, unless I'm just collapsing horribly on the math. And you're also talking way more again than horses and cattle. We're talking double. What is the figure for horses? It's 15,000, right?
15,720.
Yeah, so now we're talking kind of double, whereas before we were talking about more, but we weren't talking double.
Mhm.
So in just these 2 years, we're talking big economic boom in the share of enslaved property. So that is a fact that San Antonio has not yet reckoned. And you're breaking it for us here today. So I appreciate that.
All right. Like, let's move on to the year 1851. And yes, just like you said, the 1850s is where I discovered things are about to really start heating up. So
Whoops. Yeah.
they're really starting
Yes.
to heat up. Because where the 1840s, I will say they were very consistent. You might have a uptick here for a year, you might have a little downtick here, but as we progress now into 1851 on over, things are definitely going to start heating up here.
Wow.
Uh,
Now you've made your screen as big as you made that little screen as big as possible, right? I mean,
no, I,
yeah, the whole thing. Like,
uh,
yeah, just put it
yes.
on. You have. Okay, I just want to make sure because these are so important that I don't want people to miss it. Okay, go ahead.
All right, let's move on to
Walk
the
us
year
through.
1851 recapitulation. See, I can,
Okay. Yeah, it just takes a little practice. It doesn't roll off
yes,
the tongue.
it's an
It's like where
acquired.
we get our word for recap. You know how we always, okay, I'm going to recap. It's really a recapitulation. Yeah.
Yes. So here is the recapitulation for 1851 here in Bexar County.
All right. All
Let's
right.
in here
Drum roll. Drum roll.
um,
It's we got kind
and
of a cliffhanger
not
here.
only does this form, it lists all the or most of them that of values that for people, the persons of here in this column right here. I found this very interesting. Somebody which we could go back, but we're
Oh,
kind
I see. Wait, so
of
they're just go ahead and listing all of the enslaved people by enslaver, right?
yes, but they're not giving
So
their name.
they're not giving the names of the enslaved people, but they are giving the names of the enslavers, right? To the left, do we see that or no?
No, not in this form.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, hold on here. Let's see who's the bigger. Let's see what the total number for the biggest enslaver is in 51.
Okay. Let's see.
I'm seeing some 30s,
We have
31,
a
right?
31. We have a that looks like either it's a. I hope that's not 74.
I'm guessing it's 14. Let's just hope.
14. Let's hope there's a
One,
21. So I'm gonna see 40,
31 for
31.
$11,000. Wow, $11,000 is so much. Is that the top figure? 11,000, does that correspond, or is there a higher figure even for only 20 people or
Let's see here.
okay. Wow, very intense. 15 is
Yes.
pretty big, but that's 28 people. That's interesting.
And another question, does the value of an enslaved person, does that depend on their age?
Yes, it does, but also remember these are their tax value. So their market value is actually usually higher. You know how
Oh,
your house will be assessed at let's say 100,000, but if you were to try and sell it tomorrow, it'd be 200,000. You know what I'm saying? Like the tax
yes.
value is usually lower. But who knows? Somebody else could check that figure for us. So we're talking 149,500,
Yeah.
149,500 in enslaved property value for 320 enslaved people.
Hmm.
And we're looking, oh boy, yep, this is the big moment of truth here. We're looking at how that, first of all, how that leapt up, as you said. Now we're definitely in the six figures. It's what is that? What kind of increase is that? I'm not that good a mathematician. Let's see. If it was 90,000 a year the year before and it jumped to 150,000, then we're talking, I would say, a 50% increase in 1 year. Is that right? Or am I just a terrible math?
You're probably a better mathematician than I
All right. Well,
am. So,
our apologies to our audience if I'm way off. This is where my husband rolls his eyes in embarrassment. He's a math professor. Here, if that's a 50% though increase in 1 year, then you know the immediate effect of having finally legally taken Texas from Mexico. Having not legally taken Texas from Mexico had produced a chilling effect on the potential slave boom from 36 to 48 because people kept worrying, oh my gosh, what if Mexico comes back in and takes us? Because there's no real formal legal treaty, no international treaty. So we're not legally a republic, we're not legally independent. And so that kind of has a chilling effect on folks who want to bring their enslaved people in. So now that that has been legally resolved and it's totally legal because Mexico did sign an international treaty, now slavery seems to be immediately booming and kind of frighteningly quickly. So that's impressive. Okay. So let me see. Out of the total, so now we see that it's 50% increase. Let's see about the total of land. So we got $150,000 worth of enslaved property here being listed, but how much land property do we have? We have 638?
I believe, yeah.
638,000. Okay. So yeah, so that's still 150, 300. Okay. So that's a quarter now, right? Or am I mistaken?
That
150 is a
sounds more accurate.
quarter, a little less than a quarter.
Okay.
Okay. So originally it had been just a little bit more. Then it was 10%. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna study this. I think the next step for your project, Gabriel, is for somebody to do a year by year trend analysis. And that'll be huge. Maybe if I
That
can
would,
scrape together some money, we'll hire you for that one. Since I'm
I'll just,
clearly not lacking the talent, but
so, well, just show me how, and I'll see if I can do
this
it.
is this is hard to look at. This is hard to reckon with. I'm very kind of rattled and amazed.
Oh,
So cattle is now less than half of the value of uh assessed value of enslaved people. Wow, intense. Okay, go ahead there.
all right. So we're about to hear in 1842. And ladies and gentlemen, if you think she's rattled right now,
Well,
uh,
listen comes through. 1852. Yeah.
1852. And all right, let's jump to the year 1852, and that would be image. Did I not write that down? Oh my goodness, I
That's all
didn't.
right. We
I
can,
did.
we can just scale to 1860 and back up one. I mean 1853 and back up one. How does that work?
Let's see. This might be a damaged photo here, but see, I knew it. I found it. So
Yay.
1852, this will be the recapitulation form for 1852.
Okay, so now we have a little bigger, please. I'm My eyesight's worse when I'm sick. Okay, so now we've got almost 200,000. Oh my goodness. Is that the land?
Yes, this is acres of valued at.
Oh boy. So that's amazing. Now we have surpassed the value of land in Texas. That's impressive. But town lots. The town is clearly booming too.
It is.
So or is it possible that they're just, you know what? They may be taxing land less now too, and just shifting the tax burden to urban property. That's interesting. Well, there you go. That's huge. And of course, in terms of livestock, the outpacing is huge. How are we doing on merchandise?
Miscellaneous property, merchandise, sales valued at
What is that? Are you sure that's sales? Let's blow that up real big. Doesn't Oh, stores. Merchandise.
stores
Yeah,
again.
stores, merchandise valued at. Okay, because I thought maybe it said slaves, and then we had two categories, and that would
Yeah,
be okay. All right. Well, okay. So our commercial property is almost the same as our enslaved value. So everybody who was so proud of the prosperity and the economic, the trade and growth in business, is missing this tragic underbelly. of the economy. So this is very interesting, actually. All right, well, let's see how we're doing in 53.
All right, let's start to do it in 53. All right. So 53, let's go on over to find that puppy.
Boy, it makes you realize no wonder we had a civil war, right? Nobody's going to want to give
Yes.
stuff up.
Let's see here. If not, I have it downloaded. I can most definitely bring it up.
Okay.
They're usually towards the end, Dr. Van Hoy.
Cordova, Richards, Eastbrook, Weir, James Weir. I think he was an enslaver.
Yes, he is. He
And
is an
Trueheart is, and Dwyer, and Vanderlip, and Vance. Oh my goodness. Can we look at Vance real quick? Or is that what you're getting ready to show me?
So I'm not sure as to what this is in total. This form is in total. I guess whoever transcribed it. Let's look at Vance here. Let's see. Uh,
Click on him at the bottom. Bro, it just says brother.
yes.
Jay, and I think, oh, what is it, Edward? I'm helping you look, except I'm kind of blind. So Vance came up in the webinar with the Alamo yesterday, and I was talking to them. I was referring a little bit to um the enslaved dealings that Vance had on Alamo Plaza. So everybody's interested in Vance now. Okay, you're not finding Vance because I'm not finding him. I'm too blind.
Yeah, I
We can
not on
we can
this.
look.
We could, yeah, we could look.
We could,
Okay,
I mean,
so
I could look later on my own computer here. And other people can too. You're on image 591. Okay. So let's go to black enslaved folks here on this document just to see maybe True Heart or
and so we have some names, but I'm looking for the
Oh, do I see a
recapitulation.
40? 42? Who's got 40 there? Up way up at the top. Is that 40 enslaved people aren't there? At the top or
Uh,
is that blind?
that's
Oh,
13.
13. Thank
That's
goodness. Okay.
13.
But that's still $10,000. That's pretty
Yeah, it'll
intense.
be J.H. McLennan. So, but I can also pull up the
And that's
recapitulation.
McClellan. That's McClellan. And guess what? He was on the I forgot what creek they said he was on. You just now showed us his creek.
Yes.
So McClellan is on Salado Creek. Oh, that's right on near on the east side of San Antonio a little bit. So we got Cibolo, oh Martinez. Who's on Martinez Creek? Can you see who that is? Is that John?
Uh, Martinez.
Yeah, right there. Make that one really big because I'd like to test my hunch. John Shirts or something?
Um,
Isham. Okay, Isham. Because you know what? Just before I met with you, I was finding that although slide over to the left because maybe that's the seller. Maybe that's not that's McClellan and Pope. Oh boy. Okay. Whoa. McClellan and Pope on Martinez Creek. Now slide over. Let me see the enslaved people.
okay, let me zoom out.
McClellan and Pope on Martinez Creek. Oh, none.
Mhm.
They have none. Or
Actually, McClellan and Pope.
on
Mm,
Martinez Creek, it looks like they have no enslaved people. Is that
yes.
okay? Good. Okay. Because Martinez Creek is on the west side. That's very near St. Mary's.
So
And so
yeah,
it's fine.
this John McClellan has
He's
is the
got lots.
he's
He's
the
got
one.
lots on the Cibolo Creek. He's one of the biggest enslavers. Absolutely. But our question was, is he enslaving people on the Martinez? And it looks to me like he is not enslaving people on the Martinez, which comes as a surprise because he had a lot of horses and cattle. He and Pope did on the Martinez. So this is very interesting. Okay. Wow. And I was just talking about that with Natalia Diaz. Good. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so we're going to be pull up the 1853 recapitulation form. So
Okay.
again, just like 1852, it's roughly the similar um, format, but it's going to be down here this time. So let's zoom in here. Again, I forgot to write it down on my little itinerary, but good thing I downloaded these documents and we
Yeah,
can.
back up. You know that they say redundancy is the best insurance. All right, recapitulation of property situated in Bexar County for 1853. And we have acres of land for 1,800,000. Or no. Is that it here? Yeah, or
Um,
221,000, okay.
221.
Okay. Then we have town lots. For some reason oh, I see. So we have look, now you're getting the total tax. Okay, this is interesting. This seems to me new. So the value is 1,221,660. But then you have the total tax revenue from that 1,221,000 is 1,832. So they're getting 1,800 the county's getting $1,832 from the land, right, of revenue. They're getting $1,832.49. Okay, so then for the town lots, you're getting 1,206 $1,265. From the enslaved people, you're getting almost $500. So enslavers are paying a 15% is what it looks to me, right? 15%. They're paying 15% tax on their land, town lots, enslaved people, horses, and cattle. Merchandise is being taxed at 20. And then we got your miscellaneous stuff. That is very interesting. So that's a pretty high tax rate for back in the day, wouldn't you think?
Yes, I would say.
So the county of Bexar County is getting $500 a year out of a total of 4,000 uh what is that? 8, 9 4,000, let's just call it 5,000. They're getting $500 out of $5,000
Mm,
in revenue. So that is 10% of their revenue. 10% of the revenue of Bexar County is coming from in 1853, is coming from enslaved people. Wow.
mhm.
Man, Gabriel, I'm just floored. This is amazing. This is heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
All right. Let's see what
Absolutely.
happens in 54.
See what happens in 54. All right. So 1854, I have to show you the
And
slide.
I'll let it go a little faster because I know I'm killing you here with my dragging it out. But
It's all right. No, I'm actually learning a lot more about these tax records and how to understand them. So thank you for
yeah,
that.
my pleasure. My goodness, this is a
Um,
wonderful teamwork here.
okay, so this is the year 1854 here in Bexar County, Texas. So let's go on over here to image 661.
Man, I wish the students could have heard this. Okay, so let's.
And what I find interesting about 1854, this form is also a recapitulation of properties situated in other counties.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Okay.
or I guess I'm assuming it's people who live here in Bexar County that own property in other counties.
Oh wow. And guess what?
No.
Wow. All right. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense because those counties had just been split off.
Mhm.
The splitting off of Wilson County, um, what you call it county, Atascosa, that splitting off begins because Bexar County was huge and then it got split off. So now it's kind of saying, whoa, wait a minute. We still want to get that tax revenue from those counties. Okay, so let's see. This is an interesting thing. Okay, so here, can I just see the recapitulation in other counties?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I need to go back and remind myself when that whole Lavernia, Cibolo Creek stuff happened. But looks like we've gotten 1,200, they're taxing 1,200 uh, assessed value of enslaved people. And the tax rate is very low, not even 1%. So they're, oh, you know what's happening, I'm guessing, is that the other counties get to keep the rest of the money, but Bexar County wants a little bit. So they're
Yes.
getting 1% instead of 15%. So I guess the other county is keeping 14, the new county. All right, let
Yeah,
me see above here what you got.
ma'am. And also thank you because I was going to wait till this podcast is like, Dr. Van Hoy, can you
I know.
provide a little bit further of other
Well, you're lucky I'm just a blabbermouth there. No, I'm kidding. It'd be
well, I'm
better if
loving
I.
it.
All
I'm
right, so
loving
let's see. Town lots and enslaved people now is scratching 500,000 in 54. We're in 54, right?
Yes, we're in
Okay, well, now we're
1850.
starting to scratch 500,000, and it's assessed still at 15. So now we're sitting at $600, which is now, look at that, for town lots, 600 is already only less than between a half and a third. So the enslaved people are between a half and a third of what people are paying for a booming city in terms of their town lots.
Mhm.
And it is a core, it's not even, it's more than, it's like between a third and a quarter of land. So, it's a lot of the revenue for the city, the county Bexar County is coming from the tax on enslaved people. Wow. This is all new and amazing. Okay. 55. Let's see
Yeah,
what,
and 55, and they're for 1854, 706 enslaved persons are accounted for in Bexar County, 1854.
706.
Yep, 706. All
Wow.
right, we're going to be
Okay.
moving on to 1855 now.
Yeah.
1855. So let's
Okay.
bring up that. And like I said,
Let's start with the total number of people. I just want to see if there's a big leap year to year. I don't want to lose that figure from sight.
all right, so
There
set,
are our foremothers and forefathers, San Antonio's foremothers and forefathers who are being enslaved here.
yes, and that's 706 for 1854. Now let's move
Okay.
on to
So
1850.
706, okay. And 1855, how many folks are enslaved?
Let's find out, shall we?
Uh-huh.
All right, 979.
Wow. This is where I really wish I knew percentages. Let me see if I can figure out percentages. Okay. Wow, we almost got to 1,000. Okay, so 706. Um, 706 divided by 970. Is that what you said?
I believe, yes.
That, I don't know. Never mind. I'm too dumb. I can't figure out what percentage that is. Well, I'll ask my husband later. All right, but it still feels like a solid almost 50% again. All right. Leap in 1 year. That's the amazing thing.
Yeah.
All right. And again, enslaved people are valued at, is that 513?
583.
583. Okay, 583. Okay, wow. Okay, thank you. Next one.
All right, let's see here. Let's go on to 1856. So I gotta just like the 1856. If it loads, come on, please do. Oh, zoom out, Gabe. Okay.
You know what it is? It's also in that 1855 one, we were looking only at at Bexar County. We weren't looking at the extra counties. So it's actually bigger when you consider the counties that got hived off. So we need to remember that enslavement is skyrocketing in the former Bexar County at even a greater rate than we're seeing for Bexar County because Bexar County has been split into other counties. So in order to really capture that growth of enslaved persons in former Bexar County, we would have to add up the enslaved persons in all those other counties, Atascosa and Wilson and all those, maybe in Caldwell, I don't know. Okay.
Let's take a look at 1856 now, shall we?
Yep.
Hey,
Okay. And here we have, so we have the counties around. Let's look at those counties, other counties for 1856
okay.
first. Okay, so we're getting no enslaved people listed.
Hmm.
So I wonder what's happening. I think that what's happening is that those counties must be insisting on keeping their money.
Hmm.
Keeping the money for enslaved people themselves and not sharing with the original Bexar County. Okay. So now let's go back up here and see what Bexar County is talking about. Okay, here we have 632,960, so almost 700.
Yeah, 632,960
Okay.
for 1,079 total in enslaved persons in 1854.
Wow. Okay. So look, so 632,000 is now solidly over a third of the value of land of town lots. And it's closing in on uh it's closing in on a third of land values. So yeah, 949. Okay. So 949, yep, is a serious uh subset of the total tax revenue of 7,868. So it's well over 10%. Interesting. Okay.
All right, so that's to wrap up with 1856. And let's move on now to 1857. So 1857, let's look at 1857, shall we?
Yeah, let's start with the total enslaved people to see if it jumped.
Another solid image. And while going through, I will have to note that while going through 1857, most, if not probably more than half of those tax assessment rules are just totally ineligible. I just illegible. It's yeah, I couldn't. I just. But it's a good thing that this is. But going through
Recap is
those,
good. The
the
recap is good.
recap is good. But
Yeah, yeah,
even this little tool right here, where they even that was
they
just
can't
that
do it. Yeah.
it was yeah.
Well, I've hired thanks to O'Connor Chair funding for Black in the Barrio, I've hired a person to try and dig that out, who's the best one I know at reading old handwriting, but you're also tied with her. So if you can't read it, I don't know what she's going to do. Um but the problem with with us relying only on the recapitulations is that, and thank goodness they did those, because otherwise we'd be counting up by hand.
Yep.
But the problem is that then we miss the fine-grained analysis of who's actually doing this enslaving. So right now
Mhm.
we have a figure of total enslaved people, which looks like 1,120. Am I mistaken about that?
Yes, you are correct. And
1,120. And then you don't know if that's four people or if that's 400. So there is a big difference between small holding and, large enslaving. Nice. Okay, thank you.
no, not a problem, not a problem. So
You know
let's
what we're
move on.
doing though? You notice we're creeping on up to 50% of the tax
Hmm.
burden.
And we're about to close with the 1850s, and we're going to begin with the American Civil War here in 2 years.
Hmm.
So, um,
So
but yes,
let's,
it's a little, it's as I'm creeping through these, I'm just like, oh my, things are about to change
yeah,
essentially.
you can feel it coming. Yeah.
Yeah. You can definitely feel it coming.
All
So
right.
I want
Hey,
to show you this.
he's pretty well, right? Yeah.
Yes, I want to show you this one as well, where it does list the total number of enslavers and how much they owe. And we have a person here that owns a whopping 80.
80. Oh my goodness. Well, that is the biggest figure I've seen so
Yeah.
far.
And we have a
And
64
but
here, a
we don't
60.
know who it is, right? We don't know who the enslaver is.
I do, yes. I did take his name down by hand, and I can formulate a spreadsheet for you.
That's okay. We'll look at that later. Here we
Yes,
have a 94. Am I seeing a 94 there or no? That's
that's
24.
a 34. Here's a 41, 36.
Wow, this is big. And this
So
is
yeah,
clearly not even in the other counties. That's what's amazing. This is just in
mhm.
Bexar County where it's become very small. That's amazing.
A
All right.
whopping. This
80
person
people.
owns a whopping 80.
Enslaving 80 people. And what is the figure for the value? Can you read the figure to the right of that? Because I'm not making it out.
$40,800.
Dollars. Okay, wow. Okay. So that's very hard. It's very hard to to stomach. Can you
Mhm.
can you scroll that entire column at that I mean at that magnification? So what do we have at the top? 62?
So that's looks like it's a 68 or 66. Or no, that's a 62. Never mind.
Okay, 62, 11, 16. Let's keep scrolling. 9, 27, 12, 3, 13, 17, 3, 24, 9, 1, 4, 1, 11, 30, 3, 8, 8, 39, 31, 90. What is that? 46? What is this one here? Oh
Right
no,
here.
that's a subtotal.
That's a
Okay.
subtotal,
Subtotal.
yeah.
Okay.
And for 1858, we're looking at 973.
Now that's weird because that's way down. That might not be a recapitulation
Mhm. Let's see here.
because remember we were already in the thousands on the previous year. I
Yes,
wonder if they're getting nervous and selling folks off.
that might be a possibility.
You
Because I
don't you
did.
don't have a recap for 58
Let's see. Let's see here. Let's try this.
because it is true that enslavers were getting nervous as tensions mounted in the
This is just a
yeah.
regular assessment. Um, oh, we do. Yes.
Okay,
This.
okay.
Wait. What is it? Yep, it is.
Oh, it's 973. Hey, Gabriel.
Yes, it is 973.
This is very interesting because this means a big drop off. Now, hold it. This is 1857?
This is 1857. You're correct.
Okay, because in 1857, Atascosa County split off. So I wonder if that's where the other enslaved people who were there last year, I wonder if they're just now listed as in Atascosa.
It
So
could
you know
be.
what we'll do is we'll look and see which counties split off from Bexar County in 57, but I know, or at least I recall, that Atascosa County split off. And at one point, I know that Atascosa had at least 80 enslaved peoples, maybe in the 1860 census. So we'll have a look. That might be our explanation.
And a correction on our both of our parts, ladies and gentlemen, here at SACAM. This is not 1857. This is 1858.
Okay, 1858. All
Yeah.
right, so that would probably make even more sense if the 1857 tax assessment records, we could look at when the assessment is tabulated and when the county split off, if we want to check that hunch. So what we would do is look and see, look and see if that explains our missing serious drop, our missing enslaved peoples. Okay, nice. Okay, 58 we just completed. Let's look at 59.
Look at 58, 1859. All right. So yep,
Right,
we are
okay.
one.
We're gonna soar back up to the 4 digits.
Yeah, we are 1 year away from the American Civil War starting,
2.
and 2 years.
You
Yes, forgive me, two
Not to
years.
worry, not to worry.
All right, and let's look at that. Let's look at image 51, 1157.
All right.
And this is property still in other counties. So obviously, with that being said,
Oh, here you go. Wait a minute. We got 2 categories of enslaved peoples. That's weird. Is that right? Am I looking at
Uh,
two?
th- this is property situated in other counties.
Right, and that's how many people? Only four.
Only four.
Interesting. So they might still be taxing a das cosa, but that would only be four people, so that would not explain our we'll have to figure out who's included in that other counties category. All right, here
And
we have back over 1,000. So we went from 970 to 1,137, which is an increase of 160, and 160 is over 10% leap. So that's a big bump up. That's interesting. Okay.
so,
That's
all right.
that's sad.
That yes, it is very sad. Like I feel, I'll give you a little rundown about how I felt when I finally finished going through, and I'm gonna highlight something that I did find here that I've just found kind of heart-wrenching is kind of like a void. So 1860, we now have one more year before the kickoff of the American Civil War. Thank you for the correction for
Don't worry.
last year.
I am nauseating like that.
Okay. All right, let's look at 18, 13, 80, image 13, 80. And this is also, we're down again.
We're down again.
Yeah, we went from 1137 to now 763.
Oh, that's a huge drop. Wow, I wonder what is the explanation. We're going to need to figure this out. You know what else makes me very surprised? I guess that won't be true until 61 and 62. Because in my understanding, people from New Orleans, enslavers from New Orleans fled to Texas and to San Antonio when when the Union won. When the Union won, they rushed out to keep the Union from liberating their enslaved people. And so my conjecture is that there's going to be a big uptick in at least 62, 63. But I am shocked to see this drop off. So, and the tax rate is staying the same at 15, or is it crept up to 16%? What is
Uh,
our tax rate there? Looks like it might have crept up to 16. Yeah,
where
it's
would that?
16% at the top there. You see where it says value, blah, 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 at 16%. Yeah, so now the taxes are going up. It, I think it was 15 before, and now it's 16%. So, but
Oh, I
black,
am. So-
keep going, keep going. I can say this anyway. Our enslaved ancestors are still counting for over 10%, even though the numbers have dropped so drastically. So 10% of the revenue, tax revenue for Bexar County, is still coming from our enslaved ancestors, even though the numbers have dropped dramatically. That's intense. All right. So what do we have? 59?
This is 1860.
61. This is
This is
1861.
this is now. Oh, this right here is 1860.
Okay, let's have a look at 1860. That's what we were looking at, right? We were
Yes,
looking, and it
yeah, we were
dropped
looking
off.
at 60. Yeah, it
Oh,
dropped
it
off.
dropped off. Maybe because Lincoln got elected? I wonder. 1861, let's have a look.
Have a look at 1861. Oh, did we skip a year? Oh, wait. Did we? I think we skipped a year. I'm sorry.
Can't remember if we saw 60. It's easy
Uh,
enough to check, though.
yeah, let's check.
Let's
Again,
move it
I'll
back
call
and
it.
see.
Yeah, let's go back and check that. Yeah,
Uh,
we did.
we skipped
By
this. Yeah, now
yeah,
it's
we did.
back up. It's
Yeah,
back
by
up.
accident we skipped it.
Couple hundred, 250 or so. Can I check the total? And now we're down to, oh, look at this. This is interesting. We're down to 12 and a half. The tax rate has dropped to 12 and a half. All right. Or no, just 12? Okay, so now let's go over here and see how much of the total tax revenue enslaved people account for. It's still over 10%. Unless I'm just misreading this thing. 8,000. Yeah, I am misreading it. In fact, it's dropped. The percentage has dropped considerably. It looks like $807 are coming from our enslaved population. And then the total of the tax revenue for the year is 6,330. So 800 bucks. Yeah, that's well, 600 bucks would be 10%. 63 bucks would be 10%. Yeah, so it's far over 10% again. Interesting. Okay. Go ahead.
So we already covered 1861, correct?
Well,
My
actually,
act.
I don't think so, did we?
Well,
Let's
let's
just
check.
look at 1861 real quick. I just
Yes.
want to make sure.
So this is the recapitulation for 1861, where it's yeah we
Okay,
accidentally
that's when it dropped. Okay, now that makes more sense
yeah.
because Lincoln is elected now and it starts to, but of course it did drop also to 1860. 1860 it dropped, 1861 it dropped further. But that's less of a dramatic drop once we see the 1860. Okay. So good. All right. It might be
Yes.
that things are just getting scary for enslavers. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So I apologize
Oh
for
no.
that. So
We're
we
good.
had at
We're
least
good.
we had to go back and
This
check.
is
I'm like,
this
oh
is what history looks like. You gotta kind of keep double checking and fact checking. All
yep.
right,
And we're
1862.
1862.
There,
All right.
my hunch is that enslavement is going to go up either in 1862 or in 1863 because they feel secure now that the U.S. now that secession is happening because secession happened in February, so it's unlikely of 61. So it's unlikely that these tax assessment records happened later. I mean, before that. Do you know the day? You know what time of year they were doing these assessment, or did it vary? Wonder if there's a date.
It honestly varied.
Like here,
Uh,
this looks like June or something. I
yeah,
don't
June. Sometimes it'd be February. It would be
know.
September.
Right.
Um,
So
it
no
would
recap for 62?
yes. I accidentally clicked on the image before it. So if
Okay.
my
All right.
computer would if it would hurry up and
You know,
technically
things could have changed because now the U.S. government is no longer, I mean, Texas is no longer legally in Texas's view, it's no longer legally a state
mhm. So I
of the
accidentally
U.S. It's not a state of the U.S. It's in the Confederate state of America, CSA.
the CSA, and I apologize for the technical error. It's the image over to the previous image, and I'm just
No
like,
problem.
oh,
It's just not
not
loading. That's okay.
it's not loading really quick. But
Well, it's a cliffhanger.
it is a cliffhanger. See, I can still
There
move
we
this
go.
image. I can still move this image,
So it's
but
not going to load it. That's okay. I guess we'll let people go look at image 1515,
yeah, 1516. Yeah,
16,
because I'm on image 1517.
and it's
Uh,
still not responding. That's
it's
okay. All right. Okay, well, let's go to 63 because it does take a while. After all, 62 was when the Union defeated New Orleans. So my hunch is that 63 might show a bump up just as the New Orleans enslaved people come. They're dragged here.
oh, I think we okay, now we finally got all right. Now
All
that
right.
now that it's woken up,
Oh,
this
it's
will
woken
be
up. Yay. Okay.
as
So
again,
here's our recap. Okay.
I was getting a little nervous there.
Okay. 15, 16. The only ones still with us are the ones who care. So don't worry. Okay. So what do we have here?
So it's a supplement.
Wow, this is very interesting because it's already clearly changed formats.
Yes, it is. We have a total grand total. I'm not sure. 917, I believe. That would
Okay.
be
For a total assessed value of how much?
uh $511 and 511 and 690.
Probably 511,690. Yeah. Wow. So that's our enslaved population.
And now, unfortunately, this is the end of the roll. I did reach out to you to inform you that 1863 to 1865, they are also
They're
missing.
not doing it. They're not
They're
doing
they're
it.
they're also missing. But here's where I'm going to kind of after reaching at the end of the after the end, because this is the end. I'm going to show you something that I just found very just very kind of like, wow. So here's a portion of 1867. And after all of that, look at this form, uh, still the form, but horses, cattle, sheep. Do you see
Oh
the
my God.
difference?
Yeah. But
And
there's still Negroes on there. I mean, there's still, oh no,
no,
okay.
no, ma'am.
So now they're not there. Okay. So
Uh,
that's intense.
and I remember it was an in-person class where we were finally talking about Texas, San Antonio post Civil War.
Yeah.
Um, it was like there was a sense of foreboding, like what's happening now, like now that all of this is over.
Yeah.
And and I'm kind of looking at this, and after going through all those names, and because unfortunately, the tax assessment rules does not give names, they does not give gender, does not give specific ages.
Ages. Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like I know the enslavers.
Yeah.
I can put images and faces to these enslavers rather the enslaved persons. And
So
here,
now they're not anywhere.
it's just what happened to them. Where did they
Yeah.
go?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where did they
Yeah.
go? Now, are you ready for a little for my little thing here? That
Oh,
for my
wait. Does this say Hayden Edwards? Can you slide over to the left and see what that says next to Edwards? Because if that says Hayden Edwards, I'm very interested. No, Hayden Edwards must have been dead by then. Just yeah.
uh,
Oh, no. So it's something else. Jacinto. Okay, never mind. Okay, I thought it was Hayden, but actually I think Hayden Edwards was dead by then. Okay.
all right.
Tell me. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead and tell me what it is that a lot of stuff on the Seguins here and the Leals and
Yeah, so let's go back to my initial question that is within the state of Texas as to how far west um,
enslavement was happening.
the issue of slavery here in the state of Texas is. So I did the liberty, although this is not supposed to be a part of Bexar County here, or San Antonio. I did the liberty to pull up the El Paso County
So,
tax assessment rolls, and for the year 1859, five.
that is a shocker. Let me tell you why. Because El Paso is on the water. You can swim across to freedom in 10 minutes in 1854. So
Yeah,
this is very interesting, actually. Big find.
yeah. So this is El
So
Paso County.
5 enslaved people in all of El Paso County for
Yes, all
1857,
and 1859.
1859.
1859.
Okay, and the value is 3,000 for 5 people? That's surprising that they have not self-emancipated.
All right, and let's see. There's only one person, one enslaver here that owns these five enslaved persons, or excuse me, accounts for
Yeah,
these
then
enslaved.
enslaved these people, yeah. And who is this going to be? I can't even imagine who this is going to be.
Okay, we're gonna. Oh, here we go again.
Here we go. Is it coming?
Yep, it's coming. It's
It,
coming.
it was feeling frozen. Well, I appreciate you just bothering to check. This was very cool of
So
you.
this will be Mr. Charles Richardson.
Okay. And yep, he's got the 5. So it's only one enslaver. And I'm wondering how he manages to pull that off. So let me think. The explanation can only be ugly because if you check further east, like you check um Cameron County and the other counties along south of San Antonio, not even not even Richard King could enslave anybody.
Mhm.
So for this guy to enslave 5 people makes me think that it must have been very repressive conditions, or he must have offered them huge wages anyway. Like, this is a very interesting historical question. And then
Mhm.
the other question becomes, who is Charles Richardson? If we look this person up, is this person mayor? Is this person must be influential. So I'm very interested in your find, and I'm very grateful that you just bothered to check El Paso when you were already exhausted from Bexar County. So I appreciate that, Gabriel.
Not a problem.
Well, I think SACAM, I know I do, and I'm sure SACAM will agree that your contributions here are huge. I don't know of anybody else who's taken the time and you've taken a full semester every day, hours, even when you go to your favorite watering hole, you're
Mhm.
pulling up documents from the 1850s. And this is just a great contribution, far exceeding my hopes and expectations. So congratulations to you and thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Van Noy. It definitely wasn't easy at first, especially within the
You're a
1840s, but
sport.
it
Hey,
was,
you were a cool sport. You're just back to college after your first career, and you're just off to a wonderful start. And if whatever I can do to support you now, it's my turn. Just let me know, and we'll definitely keep you posted on what happens next and what happens next with your findings. I'm gonna stop the recording, but this is just a big Christmas gift for your old Van Hoy.
well, Merry Christmas to you and Merry Christmas to everybody here at SACAM.
Yeah.
Thank you for allowing me to give this presentation. I know we flip-flopped a little bit, but we're only human, but we got us back on track. But yes, again, thank you so much. My name is Gabriel Ernest Moten, and this will not be my last class with Dr. Teresa Van Hoy.
Yay, I'm glad to hear that. I think we got teamwork still to do.
We
Thank you
do.
so much.
All right.
All right.